75. It's not like, they had cell phones and everything. It was rough. Then all hell broke loose at the press conference in Forest Hills. That's when I famously said I want to be number one. Little did I know that I would, you just don't realize you're in the middle of a mouse.
As that kind of pit bull, like Sibulkova was a little bit like that to me as well.
Obviously, one of the storylines last week was Alex Eala and the massive crowds that she was bringing to Dubai. I think it was perhaps maybe more notable there because that's not a tournament that is typically...
A tournament designed for champions has suddenly transformed into something no one could have anticipated, as the Stuttgart Open 2026 erupts into a frenzy driven not by seedings, but by one unexpected name that is completely reshaping the atmosphere. Even legends are left wondering what's truly happening inside those packed stands. How does a replacement entry manage to outshine Grand Slam winners, and what is it that's pushing fans to treat early round matches with the intensity of a finals day?
Alexandra Eala, the teenager from the Philippines, who didn't have to play today.
You're calling it.
She's winning the tournament.
Eala?
Yep.
Oh,
wow. Why do you say that?
Mic drop from Anaco.
I don't have to elaborate.
How is she going to beat Iga?
No, I think, look, it's been so much fun to watch her play. I love the fact that she's been able to take power and use it against her opponent. I think Iga probably has a little too much horsepower and experience for her in all seriousness.
Are you stepping back now?
Yeah, but I want... This is how I get the microphone. This is how I get my ability to talk. I say something really out.
Big hot.
The Porsche Arena was never meant to feel like a pop concert. Yet in April 2026, Stuttgart carried an energy that blurred the line between elite tennis and a sold-out live show. What should have been a composed WTA 500 stop instead felt like a stage set for a headline act the crowd already adored despite her status as nothing more than a last-minute replacement on paper.
Fans had come to watch their player, and I'm wondering if you can tell us, in terms of her actual tennis, what is it that she does so well?
Well, there's a lot of things that she does really well, and I think there's a lot of things that make her opponents feel very uncomfortable. One of the things that she can't control is that she's a left-handed. There's always something about playing a left-hander that you get pulled out of the court a little bit differently. Her forehand is really good, but I think her backhand is better. Her backhand is a little bit more of an aggressive shot. The combination of her aggressive baseline shots with her backhand and then the ability to hit a heavier spin and make your opponents to kind of step back a little.
Outside the gates, the early morning air already carried a strange intensity as the cues refused to form in the usual calm, orderly fashion of a tennis event. Instead, they surged in restless waves, stretching along the barrier's hours before a single practice rally had begun. Security staff kept double-checking the same lines, almost expecting them to thin out, but they never did. With every passing minute, the crowds only grew thicker, louder, and more impatient, as if something far bigger than a routine match day was about to unfold.
My mom's Filipino, and she's like, oh, I want to go watch Alex Eala play. Like, oh my gosh, I want to watch. She's crazy about Alex. She's like, I'm going to come watch her when she plays on Thursday. And I was like, Mom, I'm going to be playing on Thursday. She's like, oh, yes, you too. Yes. I'm going to come watch you too. And I was like, what? Mom, what are you doing?
Didn't you say that she wanted to make her a Filipino dish?
Yeah. And my mom went to US Open last year. Alex was obviously huge then, and she was like, oh my gosh, I want to see Alex. Maybe I'll get a picture with her.
At the center of that growing chaos was a name never expected to dominate the draw, yet somehow already controlling the entire atmosphere. Alex Eala arrived in Stuttgart not as a seeded star or headline favorite, but as a late replacement after a withdrawal reshaped the bracket. And still, the reaction surrounding her felt as if the tournament had quietly unleashed a global phenomenon without ever warning the arena.
Alexandra, this week just keeps getting better for you. You just took out the world number 5 for the biggest win of your career. We saw the reaction. What is going through your mind right now?
I'm so blank. I'm thinking of my parents who are watching now. Mom, Dad, nakuha ko. Oh my God! I can't call them because I have this interview, but I'll call them after. Anyway, yeah, that's it.
In terms of the tennis, what did you think you did particularly well today?
Oh, I don't know. I just kept my head down and I kept running. I knew she was gonna come out.
That twist alone would have been enough to raise eyebrows, but what followed turned confusion into outright disbelief as ticket availability began collapsing at a pace usually reserved for finals day. Fans weren't just buying seats, they were competing for them in real time, as if every refresh of the booking page revealed fewer and fewer options until sold out stopped feeling like a possibility and started feeling like an inevitability. The irony was hard to miss, because Stuttgart had arrived carrying the weight of a historic clay court stop, the kind of venue that has hosted champions like Martina Navratilova. Yet the atmosphere was suddenly drifting away from tradition, almost as if the crowd itself had decided to rewrite the schedule, regardless of what the draw sheet actually said. The Stuttgart Open, formerly known as the Porsche Tennis Grand Prix, had always been known for elite competition, and this edition was no exception on paper. The field still featured top-ranked names, Grand Slam winners, and returning champions, each arriving with the kind of expectations that would normally dominate every headline. But even with all that star power present, the spotlight kept bending in a different direction, pulled unexpectedly toward Alex Eala, the late replacement entry whose presence seemed to reshape the entire rhythm of the tournament before a ball had even been struck.
Specific players that you really bond with in those moments?
I love Jenny Brady. She's hilarious.
Yep.
So whenever I'm feeling a little down or something's happening, I'll always go to Jenny because she'll have something funny to say about it and we'll get a little laugh going. So yeah, Jenny, Alex Eala, she'll also have some good laughs in those crazy moments. So you really have to have humor with it. I mean, we're going through all sorts of things, so you kind of just have to be humorous about it and let everything happen.
Expectations and reality rarely move at the same pace in modern tennis, especially when a different kind of audience momentum starts to take over. And in this case, that momentum had little to do with ranking points. It began subtly, almost easy to overlook, when early practice sessions suddenly drew unusually large crowds, the kind that felt like they belonged deeper into a tournament rather than at the very beginning. Then a late withdrawal from a higher-ranked player reshuffled the draw at the last moment, placing Alex Eala directly onto the main stage. In most events, that kind of change barely registers beyond an official update. But in Stuttgart, it felt like a spark landing in dry grass. Almost immediately, the narrative shifted from replacement entry to must-see arrival. And crucially, that shift wasn't manufactured through marketing or hype campaigns. It came from fans who had already been following her rise long before she stepped into this arena. Her season leading into Stuttgart had been a mix of breakthrough performances and sharp reminders that progress in tennis rarely moves in a straight line, moments of momentum interrupted by setbacks, then rebuilt again through persistence and timing. What made this version different was the atmosphere around it. Conversations around her weren't just about results anymore. They were about presence, expectation, and the feeling that something was building faster than the rankings could explain. Even commentary and reactions around her matches began to reflect that tension: part analysis, part anticipation, part disbelief that a late entry could reshape the emotional tone of an entire tournament. Arriving in numbers that made the arena feel less like a neutral European stop and more like a shifting home crowd transported across continents. And that presence changed everything. Even moments where commanding leads slipped away, points that would normally be dissected through tactics, footwork, and pressure management, started to feel different in tone. They weren't just errors or momentum swings anymore. They became part of a larger, unfolding test, as if the learning curve of elite tennis was being stretched in real time under an unfamiliar kind of attention. Yet none of that complexity seemed to matter in Stuttgart, because the crowd had already simplified the equation into something far more emotional than analytical. The reaction inside the stands wasn't following rankings or match logic, it was following connection, identity, and the feeling of witnessing something that felt personally significant. And that's where the situation becomes truly unusual, because even figures deeply rooted in tennis history struggled to fully interpret what was unfolding. When comments attributed to legends like Martina Navratilova began circulating around the growing crowd response to Alex Eala, they weren't framed as routine analysis. They were framed as surprise and acknowledgement that the spotlight was shifting in ways that didn't match the usual logic of the sport. The irony sharpened further here, because while tennis institutions tend to predict audience behavior through rankings, seedings, and marquee matchups, what unfolded in Stuttgart was being shaped by something far less controllable: diaspora energy, digital visibility, and the emotional force of representation. And when questions were put directly to her after landmark victories about what it meant to make history for her country, about being the first from the Philippines to break through at that level, the answers reflected something grounded rather than grand. Not a declaration of destiny, but an awareness of how unusual the path had been and how quickly it was now expanding beyond anything the draw sheet had originally suggested. Expectation to something far less predictable and far more emotional. Early rounds began to feel like marquee events in their own right. The presence of that growing crowd was not passive. It came with noise, coordination, and a kind of emotional investment that turned every rally into a shared moment rather than a quiet exchange between player and opponent. At times, the demand became so intense that organizers were forced into uncomfortable adjustments, acknowledging that certain walkways were packed with fans who never even secured entry, while matches themselves carried a weight far beyond their official billing. The pattern had been noticed before, not by marketing teams, but by experienced voices in the sport, including Martina Navratilova, who recognized early signs of a scheduling imbalance, where audience demand was beginning to outpace logistical planning. And yet, even with those warnings, Stuttgart still found itself reacting rather than anticipating what the crowd was becoming. On court, the sporting narrative only added another layer of tension. Alex Eala wasn't entering a softened draw. She was stepping directly into a section filled with established names, Grand Slam experience, and proven clay court strength. Every round carried the possibility of immediate escalation, where momentum could be tested not gradually, but instantly. One potential early matchup stood out in particular, setting up the possibility of facing a top-seeded opponent before the quarterfinal stage, a scenario that would typically overwhelm a newcomer, yet here felt like part of a larger unfolding storyline rather than an obstacle. And then there was the added complexity of identity within the draw itself. The presence of players with Filipino heritage connections such as Leila Fernandez created a rare overlap where nationality, diaspora support, and competitive pathways intersected unusually early in the tournament. It meant that even first-round matches carried emotional layers that extended far beyond rankings or form. Yet through all of it, the most striking detail remained the same: how quickly Stuttgart shifted from expectation into something far more unpredictable, where the atmosphere itself began to behave like the main story. Because even practice courts began attracting crowds that followed Alex Eala with the same intensity usually reserved for match courts, turning warm-ups into small-scale events of their own. In most tournaments, structure is the foundation. Everything else depends on fixed schedules, predictable ticket demand, and a clear hierarchy of star power that determines where attention flows. But Stuttgart 2026, at least in its opening phase, felt like those structures were being quietly rewritten in real time rather than simply followed. Even the physical experience of being there changed. Outside the arena, conversations were no longer centered on predictions or title contenders, but on logistics, whether people would actually get inside in time to see specific matches. Ticket resale chatter intensified. Queue times became part of the storyline. Attendance itself started to feel like a parallel competition running alongside the tournament. Inside the arena, that pressure translated into an atmosphere unusually loud for early rounds, where points received reactions more commonly associated with semifinals. The psychological effect on players became difficult to ignore, not because of hostility, but because of scale. Every rally felt amplified, every shift in momentum instantly shared with thousands reacting as one. And even in lighter moments, that energy was acknowledged. Players like Leila Fernandez spoke in interviews about the unusual experience of sharing courts with the same fanbase, noting how doubles partnerships and practice sessions could suddenly feel like home crowd events, even when the official draw didn't suggest anything of the sort. What made Stuttgart stand out wasn't just the presence of big names or strong matchups. It was how quickly attention itself became fluid, no longer dictated purely by scheduling or ranking, but by emotion, identity, and momentum that the tournament structure wasn't fully designed to contain. As if the entire event had quietly slipped into a different version of itself without any official announcement. Nothing on paper changed, the draw stayed fixed, the schedule remained intact, the seeding logic still stood exactly as designed. And yet inside the Porsche arena, the experience no longer matched the document that governed it. It felt less like a traditional tournament progression and more like a moving performance, where different sessions began to feel connected by audience presence rather than by match order. The central question kept resurfacing without ever being fully resolved. Was this simply a temporary surge driven by momentum, curiosity, and a compelling new storyline? Or was it something deeper, an early sign of a structural shift in how audience power operates within women's tennis? Because if Stuttgart 2026 is any indication, it carries a weight of expectation that is no longer fully controlled by organizers, commentators, or even historical precedent. The tension now sits in that uncomfortable space between what the draw predicts and what the crowd demands, between what the sport plans and what the audience decides in real time. And that is what makes the situation difficult to categorize. Stuttgart was never supposed to be defined by a replacement entry. Yet here it is, with the entire narrative bending, slowly, visibly, and almost collectively around one. Across other tournaments, including scenes like those described at the Australian Open, where Alex Eala has drawn significant Filipino fan presence, the same pattern begins to echo, crowds forming around identity, momentum following players beyond scheduling logic, and atmosphere shifting faster than institutional frameworks can adjust. The strange part is that nothing officially changed. And yet everything about how it felt inside Stuttgart did, like the sport was still the same on paper, but no longer behaving the same in practice. Was not happening in the press conferences or the official commentary,